March 24, 1949, 0600 hours. The facility stood empty, evacuation complete, 10 bodies removed, survivors transferred to psychiatric observation, test cell 0 sealed behind 3 feet of poured concrete. Dr. Yuri Petrov's final recommendation had been clear: destroy all research, classify everything, never speak of it again. But the military doesn't destroy what it doesn't understand. It studies it. In a basement archive in Moscow, a colonel named Dmitry Volkov received the classified files. Not the sanitized version, the complete records, photographs of the dead, autopsy reports, security footage, environmental readings from test cell 0, and one notation that appeared in every death report, circled in red ink: air density anomaly detected in proximity to deceased. Volkov was not a scientist. He was intelligence, counterintelligence specifically. His job was finding patterns others missed. And he found a pattern. The autopsy reports made no medical sense. 10 bodies, 4 subjects, 6 guards, all dead within minutes of each other. No visible trauma, no toxins, no disease, no physical explanation. But 3 findings appeared in every report. Core body temperature had dropped to match ambient temperature within seconds of death. Physiologically impossible. Human bodies don't cool that fast. Not for hours, not without chemical intervention. The eyes showed unusual patterns, not damage. The retinas were intact, but the pupils were fixed in unusual dilation, as if focused on something at an impossible distance, something the medical examiner described as beyond infinity. And tissue samples showed something the pathologist had never seen: cellular degradation that shouldn't occur in recently deceased tissue, as if the bodies had been dead much longer than the timeline indicated, as if time itself had moved differently for them in their final moments. But the most disturbing finding wasn't in the bodies. It was in the room where they died. The observation room had been photographed as part of the investigation. Standard procedure. Every photograph showed the same anomaly. The corners of the room appeared darker in the photographs than they had to the naked eye, significantly darker, and in several photographs, if examined closely, very closely, something else was visible. Shapes in those corners. Tall, impossibly tall, thin, humanoid, but stretched, like shadows cast by something standing in another dimension entirely. The photographer reported nothing unusual when taking the pictures. The room had looked normal to him, but the camera had captured something his eyes had filtered out. Colonel Volkov ordered every piece of security footage from the facility reviewed. Frame by frame, every camera, every angle. The review took 6 weeks. What they found changed everything. The distortions had been happening for days before the deaths, not just in test cell 0, throughout the entire facility. Brief, single frames, easy to miss at normal playback speed. But when isolated and enhanced, they showed something impossible. In corridors that should have been empty, shadows appeared where no physical object existed to cast them. In corners where lighting was consistent and measurable, darkness pooled in ways that violated physics. And in 17 separate instances spread across 4 days, the footage showed something that made the review team stop the analysis entirely and request armed guards be present before continuing. Shapes in the corners, in the shadows, in the spaces between. Tall figures, 7 feet, 8 feet, sometimes taller. The height seemed to vary, or perhaps the perspective was wrong. Perhaps they existed in a space where height didn't mean what it should. They were never present for more than a single frame. One frame of distortion, the shape visible, then gone. As if they existed in moments too brief for continuous observation, the team cataloged every instance, mapped every location, analyzed every anomaly, and found something that made Colonel Volkov classify the entire investigation beyond top secret and limit access to 3 people, including himself. The distortions didn't stop when the facility was evacuated. They continued. Cameras left running for documentation purposes kept recording. Days after the evacuation, weeks after, the shapes kept appearing in empty corridors, in sealed rooms, in test cell 0 itself, visible through the observation window before it was filled with concrete, and they were appearing more frequently, as if whatever they had been awakened, made aware of something, learning. One particular sequence of footage would later be shown to exactly 3 scientists under armed supervision, never released, never officially acknowledged. 7 days after evacuation, Corridor C7, camera positioned to monitor the sealed entrance to test cell 0. 0300 hours, empty corridor, normal lighting, nothing unusual. 0301 hours, a shadow appears in the corner, far end of the corridor, no source, no physical object to cast it. 0302 hours, the shadow is larger, darker. The corner appears to have deepened, as if space itself had folded wrong. 0303 hours, something moves in that darkness, visible for exactly 3 frames, tall, thin, wrong. 0304 hours, the shadow has spread, covering the entire corner, consuming light. 0305 hours, the camera experiences interference, static, distortion. 0306 hours, normal, empty corridor, nothing unusual, the shadow gone. But if the footage was examined frame by frame, during that minute of static, something could be seen, a shape moving down the corridor, toward the camera, growing larger, coming closer, and in the final frame before normal recording resumed, barely visible, compressed in the last moment of distortion. Something tall standing directly in front of the camera. The lens should have captured it clearly. Instead, only a darkness that had shape but no detail. A void in the form of something that might have been looking down at the camera, at whoever would eventually watch this footage. As if it knew it was being observed, as if it was observing back. The 3 scientists who viewed this footage reported significant psychological distress afterward. One resigned from government service within the month. One requested immediate transfer to a different department. The third began experiencing severe insomnia, refused to enter rooms alone, insisted on keeping all lights on at all times. He was found dead in his apartment 6 months later, sitting in the exact center of his living room. As far from all corners as the space allowed, eyes open, body cold, no explanation. Colonel Volkov authorized one final investigation, a team of scientists, not to study the compound, not to replicate the experiment, to understand what the subjects had actually seen, what had killed the guards, what appeared in the footage. The team worked in isolation for 8 months. Physicists, neurologists, perceptual psychologists, experts in human vision and consciousness. They also consulted historians, folklorists, experts in ancient mythology. Their report was 17 pages long. 14 pages were scientific analysis, data, measurements, observations, but the final 3 pages contained a conclusion that ended the investigation permanently. The entities were real, not hallucinations, not psychological breaks, not mass delusion, real, and they had been documented before, throughout human history, in every culture under different names. The Slavic people called them domovoi, house spirits, beings that lived in corners of homes, always watching, always present, invisible unless the household was in danger. The Japanese knew them as nurikabe, wall dwellers, creatures that existed where walls met, where shadows pooled, where space folded wrong. In Norse mythology, they were the Huldufolk, the hidden people, beings that occupied the same space as humans but remained unseen unless they chose to reveal themselves. The Navajo spoke of the Yi Naldlushi, watchers in the darkness, tall figures that stood in corners of hogans, that disappeared when looked at directly. Every culture had stories of them, corner dwellers, shadow people, watchers, beings that lived alongside humans, in the same buildings, the same rooms, invisible to normal perception. The report concluded these weren't myths or folklore. They were accurate descriptions of something real, something that had always existed, something every human civilization had encountered and learned to ignore. The human brain, the scientists determined, had evolved to filter them out, to refuse to process their presence, a survival mechanism developed over thousands of years, because those who saw them too clearly, too often, went insane. The compound used in the experiment didn't create anything new. It simply stripped away millennia of evolutionary protection, forced the subjects to see what their ancestors had learned to ignore. The entities themselves were not supernatural, not spirits, not demons. They were living beings, physical, present, occupying the same space as humans, but existing in the gaps of perception, in corners, because corners are where depth perception fails, where the brain struggles to model space correctly, where these beings naturally reside. They were tall and elongated because that's their actual form, stretched, thin, adapted to living in the narrow spaces between walls. They moved only when unobserved because direct observation somehow forced the brain's filter to activate, to block them out, to protect the observer from seeing what shouldn't be seen. The cameras captured them inconsistently because cameras record all light. But the entities existed between moments, between frames, in the gaps of frozen time. The guards died because their filters broke completely. They began seeing these beings constantly, in every corner, every shadow, every room, and the human mind cannot survive that level of exposure. The cold bodies, the changed eyes, the rapid cellular decay, all signs that prolonged perception of these entities destroys human consciousness. And when the mind breaks completely, the body follows. The report's final paragraph was clear. The entities were not created by the experiment. They were revealed. They had always been there. In every corner, every building, every civilization throughout human history, ancient people knew about them, called them by different names, developed rituals and beliefs to cope with occasional sightings, but they also learned not to look too closely, not to focus on corners too long, not to acknowledge them, because acknowledgement made them more visible, made them aware of the observer, created a connection that could destroy the human mind. The experiment removed that protection, forced continuous awareness, created exposure that evolution had specifically designed to prevent. Colonel Volkov classified the report at levels requiring direct authorization from the top military leadership to access. He recommended all research cease immediately, all materials destroyed, all witnesses isolated. The report concluded with a final recommendation that would be followed exactly. This knowledge must never become public. The experiment must never be repeated. The compound must be completely eradicated. Because if enough people began seeing these entities, if the filter failed on a larger scale, humanity would face the same fate as the subjects and guards, not because the entities were dangerous in themselves, but because humans cannot survive seeing them continuously. The facility remained sealed for 3 years, officially abandoned, officially forgotten, but cameras continued running inside. Automatic systems, backup power, recording empty corridors, sealed chambers, darkness and silence, and the distortions continued. More frequently as time passed, shadows in corners growing darker, shapes appearing in footage, spaces folding wrong. In 1952, a decision was made to enter the facility one final time, not to retrieve research, not to study further, to destroy it completely. A demolition team was sent, 8 men, combat engineers, experienced with dangerous sites. They were given specific instructions: enter, plant explosives, exit, detonate from safe distance. Maximum time inside, 30 minutes. They entered at 0900 hours. By 0920 hours, communication ceased. The backup team entered at 1100 hours to investigate. They found 7 bodies scattered throughout the facility, in corridors, in laboratories, in the observation room, all dead, all eyes open, all cold, all facing corners. The 8th man was found alive, sitting in the exact center of the main corridor, eyes closed, hands over his ears, whispering the same words repeatedly: They're in every corner. They're watching. They've always been watching. He was transferred to psychiatric care, never recovered, never spoke coherently again. The facility was demolished by remote detonation, explosives planted by unmanned vehicles, triggered from 10 kilometers away. The entire structure collapsed, buried under its own rubble, covered with concrete, sealed permanently. But demolition crews working the site reported unusual difficulties, equipment malfunctions, unexplained shadows in photographs, team members experiencing severe unease. 3 workers requested transfer after reporting they saw things in their peripheral vision while working near the site. Tall shapes in the rubble, watching from shadows, moving when not observed directly. The site was abandoned, incomplete, declared hazardous, forbidden to all access. It remains that way today. Satellite imagery shows nothing unusual. Rubble, concrete, empty land. But if examined very carefully, frame by frame, certain anomalies appear. Shadows that don't match the sun position, darkness pooling in spaces that should be evenly lit, and occasionally, very rarely, something visible in the corners of the frame. Tall, thin, wrong. There for one image, gone in the next, as if the entities remain, as if they were never confined to the facility at all, as if they're everywhere. The Russian sleep experiment is known today as an internet legend, a creepypasta, fiction. No official records exist, no government acknowledges it, but in restricted archives, sealed behind classification, fragments remain. Technical notes, autopsy reports, corrupted footage, and all of them point to the same conclusion. Human beings do not see reality as it truly is. We see a version our minds can survive, filtered, simplified, safe, because in the spaces that are removed, something else exists, not created, not summoned, always there. Across the world, people report the same things. Figures in the corner of a room that disappear when looked at directly. Shadows moving against the light. Tall shapes seen only in peripheral vision. They call them many names. Shadow people, Hat Man, Night Watchers, different cultures, different times, same description. The experiment didn't create these entities, it removed the filter. And for the first time, people saw what had always been standing there, in corners, in shadows, in every place where light and perception weaken. Not predators, not ghosts, observers. The guards didn't die from injury. They saw too much. Their bodies failed trying to process something the human mind was never designed to understand. The facility was shut down, not because it failed, but because it proved something no one was prepared to accept. We have never been alone. Even now, the filter is still working, protecting you, hiding what stands just outside your focus. But sometimes it slips. Late at night, in dim light, when your eyes adjust and something feels slightly wrong, a corner too dark, a shape too tall, a presence that disappears the moment you try to see it. And maybe that instinct you feel, that quiet urge not to stare too long into shadows, isn't fear, it's recognition, because once you truly see them, they don't disappear, they notice you. And right now, in the corner of the room you're in, there is a space your eyes are avoiding, a place where the light doesn't fully reach, where something could be standing, perfectly still, watching, just beyond the edge of your perception.